All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Frontier Tech and how can corporate L&D support the jobs of tomorrow. And we want to thank everyone for joining this because we know we're competing with apparently Bill Gates. And so we will try our best, and we guarantee we're going to have more insightful insights about the jobs of the future. So my name is Saurabh Sanghvi, and I'm a partner with McKinsey, and I lead a lot of our work across higher education, workforce development, and L&D. And so maybe to just frame a little bit of this conversation, what I want to start with is, what I want to argue is we are in one of the most disruptive time periods when you start thinking about the jobs for the future. Number one, we're seeing a labor market that we've never seen before. We're seeing labor shortages that are unprecedented and that we haven't seen in the past decades. Second, there's a huge set of anxiety around the future of work. We're seeing this anxiety from governors, from CEOs, but most importantly from individual workers who are really concerned about, what does the future entail. Third, we're seeing all kinds of catalytic investments in things like the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, around climate tech, billions and trillions of dollars that are going to create new jobs. And then fourth, like every other panel has talked about already this week, we're seeing this unprecedented technology come in with GPT, but not only AI-related tech, we're also seeing this in terms of quantum computing, AR and VR, biocomputing, which in my opinion is not getting enough discussion. And so when you think about all four of these factors, how can companies keep up with all of this change in a world where the clock speed for change is actually increasing? And so what I want to spend some time on is really thinking about, in that crazy world, how does L&D not only keep up, but actually shape the future of what workers need to be learning? And so joining me to do that, we've got this wonderful panel. And we discussed in kind of the pre-briefing that we're going to provide some provocative thoughts. We're going to even try to debate, hopefully in a friendly way. But without further ado, let's get started. And so maybe the first thing that I want to get into is around a provocative vision for L&D. And so Molly, maybe let me start with you. In this rapidly changing environment that I just talked about, what is a provocative vision or idea that you have or that Pepsi has been driving around what L&D should do over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm CLO at PepsiCo, and I take inspiration from a few different thought leaders out there. A few of them are academics. One is John Boudreau at University of Southern California, who writes about work without jobs, and this idea that in the future we're a bundle of skills and we can move our skills from task to task and from project to project without the constraints of a full-time job. And so at PepsiCo, we're working a lot on the skills revolution, evolution, and we're assembling all the technology infrastructure that you need to operate your human capital systems from a skills basis. So I think it's going to take a lot of change management to get there, but at least we're going to have all the raw materials. A couple other provocative inspirations are Stanford, and this project is probably 10 years old now, but they wrote about something called open loop learning, where you don't go to college for the 4 years from your age 18 to 22. You're sort of admitted to Stanford for a basket of 4 to 6 years, and you go when you need to go, and you go in and out of the workforce. So I'm wondering if at PepsiCo in the future, or at any company, you would have roles that are purely developmental, where you have, instead of interns being a one-way street, they come, you work for a couple years, and they go back. And so it's a much more fluid relationship between employers and universities. And then finally, and this is much farther into the frontier, but George Siemens, who's at the University of Texas and is here somewhere at this conference, has talked for years about the idea that AI learns and people do the sense making. So that just completely blew my mind when I heard him say it 4 years ago, and today it just seems very prescient. So as a CLO, am I not what am I even teaching people? I mean, as a marketer, do I have to learn how to write a brief? Or do I just need to have leadership skills so I can assemble the right mix of AI talent and human talent and explain to them what we're all, what that vision is? So those are three different people that I take inspiration from and try to apply at PepsiCo.
Fascinating and scary. Praveen, what are you doing at Visa on some of these topics?
So I've been a learning technologist probably all my career, and now slowly moving into employee experience. The biggest thing for me, which is disruptive in my mind, is several years ago we would have said, we had this vision of an invisible learning organization. Like, L&D as a function, I mean, it exists to train people, but can we use technology to sort of automate and create an experience for the learners that is unprecedented? And everybody said, you know what? We should have a Google-like search engine where people should be able to go and search for it, get answers, develop skills. This was the vision. If you actually went to L&D conferences 10 years ago, people were talking about this. Now that is a reality. In some ways, you've seen demos from many of the vendors here that is basically showing what generative AI and some of these technologies are able to. So to me, the question is, how do you sort of reimagine the roles and the skills that exist within the L&D organization to work in tandem with the technology that exists from an AI perspective and sort of create more operational efficiency, deliver a better employee experience for the learners in your organization, and also potentially your customers if you have one of those businesses.
Interesting. Rob, what are your thoughts on this?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming instead of sitting in line for Bill. So a couple things. I think I agree with almost everything that's been said so far. Like, I'm also a big fan of John Boudreau's work without jobs, and thinking about how we parse things down. I think that's very timely with the skills conversation. And then I look at some of the disruptors that are coming, and I've said this for a few years, but I think now it's like you can't ignore it anymore, maybe. That learning and development function, as a function, needs to shift from being the sort of creator of product and sort of a curator of corporate knowledge to really becoming the enabler. And really where the existential question or the existential function of an L&D organization is more about making sure people have the ability and the capacity to learn regardless of what it is. So that might mean you unleash ChatGPT in your organization and people can ask a question and, focused on your corporate, knowledge bases, can produce a course for them and take them through everything they need to know without the intervention of an instructional designer or anything like that. Literally in real time on the fly. And so how does L&D's role shift then to be about making those things kind of happen, removing obstacles to people being able to learn, more than about sort of the producer model I think that we've had in the past? I think that's the question that sort of is scary, right? Because I think it's disrupting a lot of the traditional work that we do.
Interesting. So Anshuman, you're coming at this from a different perspective, so I'd love to hear your bold vision or ideas of what's needed in this space.
Thanks, Saurabh. So I am the founder of a company called Terra.do, and we're trying to build the world's largest platform for people learning and working in climate. So if you missed Bill's talk, that's okay. I'm going to fill in all of that today, right now. To me, this is all new territory. I was a tech entrepreneur running tech companies, working at big places like Google, but small startups otherwise of my own. And to me, this decade, and especially the last couple of years, have been completely disorienting. And I think that's something which I see a lot of employees also grappling with, which is you're living in a world where you have something like generative AI, which essentially means everyone has a co-pilot, or maybe not a job. And second, you're living in an unfolding climate crisis, which is unlike anything we have seen in humanity's history. And some of us probably get the gravity of that, some of us don't, but it's here. So what that means is that employees are disoriented. You've seen a lot of news stories about political movements almost starting inside organizations, right? Coinbase's CEO going out and saying, if you have politics, get out of the company, don't stay here. My sense is that in this disorienting time, a lot of employees would seek community and meaning, and that community and meaning will have to be delivered by people like us who are thinking about learning and community together, which means that we'll have to bring out all of these challenges that are in the outside world right now into our workplace. And that's something which I don't think a lot of us are geared for right now.
Thanks, Anshuman. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And at this conference, and even as I think about a lot of these technologies and all of the conversation, there's clearly a lot of hype right now around generative AI. But that's not the only technology that's out there. We're seeing all kinds of advances in terms of VR technology and the ability to do more simulations. We're seeing some advances around quantum computing, which may even turbocharge AI to new heights that we haven't seen. Now, to be a little provocative, what I might argue is if we look at our education across K-12, higher ed, but I'd even argue L&D, we haven't seen changes commensurate to some of these technology changes that we're seeing. And so what I'd love for you all to discuss is a little bit of, first of all, which of these technologies are actually real and which ones are hype, but also how are we truly going to move towards some of those visions that you just articulated versus fall back to the old ways of doing things which have been fairly complacent and stable. And so maybe to start, Praveen, do you want to give us some thoughts on what are you betting on versus what's just hype?
I think of all the technologies that I've heard of recently, and part of the reason of coming to ASU+GSV was to learn about AI's potential in the education and L&D space. I think if you look back a couple of years ago, AI was still, I was recently reading, if you look from 2016 to where we are in 2023, when originally there was talk about AI versus where we are now with generative AI, the growth of the technology itself has accelerated. And we don't know what 2024 is going to bring in terms of AI. I also think that it has become so much more pervasive and accessible to everyone. That wasn't the case 2-3 years ago. Today, you can go and sign up for ChatGPT. You can actually try it out. You can actually feel for yourself as to what the capabilities of the platform are. So that sort of opens the door in my mind to start looking at use cases within L&D. As Rob was saying, why couldn't content development be automated? Why couldn't skills assessment be automated? Why couldn't skill gaps be create predictive models around that? I can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel, if I may say that, with the current technology in AI. I don't know if I feel the same way about AR, VR, only because there was a lot of hype about it in terms of what it could do, but very soon it became very clear that there were certain industries where that technology was actually well suited for, like manufacturing, or let's say oil and gas, or even in the restaurant industry where you had large number of employees that were going through training versus, let's say, an industry like digital payments. There's very rarely that I can find a use case where I can apply AR, VR training to. So I think the lens I'm looking at this technology from is, yes, I understand the hype, but I want to be careful about the use case application and fit for purpose of that technology in the context of the industry where it's being applied. That's my 2 cents.
Rob, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think from a hype perspective, people have been talking about AI for a few years, and really what they meant was they have some sort of algorithm that sits behind something. Compared to generative AI like you're seeing today, I think there's a big distinction between sort of those 2 things, right? So I think there's been a lot of hype filtering around how we use AI to make this magic happen for you, which is really just some good computational work, basically, in the background. So I think from that perspective, sorting through the hype of that has been sort of interesting, and I think most L&D professionals have sort of treaded with caution in that space because it's been difficult to sort out from the hype. I think as you see generative AI, machine language learning and all this other stuff sort of really becoming mainstream now, you can see sort of the difference from a potential perspective. Right? I think the conversation about ChatGPT and, can I just go ask for a course and it creates it on the fly, that kind of thinking was not what we were thinking about when people were talking about how they were using AI to do things. So I think there's a distinction, sort of an inflection point right now, and it seems like the sentiment of most of us is like, so what does that mean? Where do we start to experiment? You know, how far can we actually go? And you know, and frankly, what's the supplier community reaction going to be in terms of who's going to come to market with something that really matches sort of, you know, me like a buyer's thinking in terms of how that would be applied. So I think about it in that construct. I think the one other thing I would say, like thinking about this conference and companies that I like are also the ones that are still focused on the fact that people learn from other people is one example. And it's not going to go away, even though we'll all be comfortable with our text-based Alexa, basically, which is what generative ChatGPT is right now. You know, we'll all be really comfortable with that, but I do think the human interaction element will still be really important. And so, you know, the simple model is Zoom or Google Meet or whatever it might be, but I think leveraging AI to connect people that are trying to solve the same problems or people that need expert access in an organization, you know, like McDonald's is 2 million people, right? There's an expert on something somewhere in the organization. How do I find out where they are? How do I get connected to them? If I need help and I want to talk to someone, which is a novel concept, but if I actually want to talk to someone about it, you know, how do I find them? I think AI can be really leveraged that way to help drive that kind of learning experience for people in a super positive way that's kind of under-leveraged today.
Interesting. Anshuman, I see you're trying to get a word in, and so definitely add to it. But what I'd love to hear too is, as you're building your platform, like what's your vision for how to inject some of these new technologies as you continue to scale?
No, thank you, and I'll connect to that. So back in 2019-20, when I was thinking about climate change and getting into it, I was completely taken up by VR, and for a very simple reason, which is when you look at, I mean, 2020 was a weird year for people living in California. They saw orange skies. You didn't need a VR headset to visualize what a climate changed world would look like. But things like ocean acidification, right? It's very hard to visualize, why should I care, and so on. And there are these amazing VR experiences that have been built, especially at Stanford, where I live right now, that allow you to visualize that. So VR as an empathy creation machine is a very powerful construct that I thought in climate change would make a lot of sense. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the world, but unfortunately with the speed at which the climate crisis has been coming at us, we don't need these visualization machines, unfortunately, as much because it's at our doorsteps right now. So I've kind of given up on that ghost a little bit right now. But I'm going to bring it back to Rob, what Rob said, which is there's this very interesting study by this professor, Erica Chenoweth, about what creates successful social movements, right? And the magic number there, and I'm bastardizing it really badly, but it's 3.5%. 3.5% of any population, when it really becomes active and activated, that social movement has a phenomenal chance of success. This has been studied multiple times. Now, if you look at the corporate environment or the large enterprise kind of an environment, I can tell you today that there are 3.5% plus people, employees inside these organizations right now, who are banging on the doors and saying, we need to do something about what's collapsing, the ecosystems that are collapsing around us. This is no longer just altruism. This is a lot more serious and existential than that. So when I, for example, look at the kind of product offering that we have for Terra, when we go to sustainability teams, what I typically see is a 50,000 people organization with an aggressive net zero target, but a 10 people sustainability team barely keeping their heads together, right? So therefore, all that they're doing is pushing out sustainability reports up in the fronts, while they have all of these employees who really want to use their skills for sustainability projects. So that's a platform that we have built, which is a lot more around learning, but frankly, at the heart of it is community. How do we build communities of practice around every single sustainability goal, technology that is happening inside the enterprise already?
This is great. And so if I take a lot of the things that you've shared, you know, one of the questions that I always get when I'm talking to L&D organizations and or CEOs or CHROs is how do we measure the ROI of this? How do we figure out if this is reaching all the people? And so as I think about some of the ideas that you all shared of being able to do things that are more community-based, doing things that are more experiential, being able to connect people for some more of these human things, how do we answer those questions? What's the way that you're already doing or that you think organizations need to shift of how we talk about ROI of L&D? Maybe Molly, let me start with you on this.
Yeah, I mean, if you're focused on reskilling and upskilling, then it's pretty easy because you're counting people that you're moving from one job to another, and that new job is really important to the organization. So you're either retaining people and you're reducing attrition because they're really happy with the employee value proposition of L&D that you're offering, or you're reducing your talent acquisition costs by moving people over. I think it's a lot harder for leadership and management development to measure ROI, and for that, we look at talent outcomes. So we look at promotion rates, even lateral move rates, and we compare for people that come to our programs versus those who haven't. We look at their scores and all the various leadership assessments that we give people every year, and because the leadership programs are all anchored on our leadership framework and our company values, and then we assess people on those too. So there's kind of readily available data. Now you can't say it's causal, but you can draw correlations from it, and that seems to satisfy our CHRO, right? So, to be frank. What I get more excited about is really the career mobility ROI.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think, ROI for me is always sort of backwards looking. Mm-hmm. And I think much more of our conversations need to be forward looking. So before we do anything, do we know how we're going to measure success along the way? Or are we super clear on what the outcome is? I think like upskilling, reskilling efforts, you do them for a purpose. You have some measure in mind or some outcome in mind that you're going for. I think just being more explicit about that from an L&D perspective about here's why we're going to do or why we want to do what we want to do, and these are the measures we're going to use to show that we're progressing against some business strategy. A lot of times we'll avoid the back-end conversation of, give me the ROI on what we just did there. Because generally that's a statement that says someone doesn't believe it added value, right? Or it was off topic relative to the overall business climate and strategy. So I think those are the kind of things, when I think about ROI, I don't know, most of my career I've been able to avoid really being challenged on ROI by holding stakeholders accountable for telling me what success looks like before I actually do something.
And maybe, Rob, just to follow up on that, as we think about some of the goals that we talked about, what should be some of those outcomes in this world where we're thinking differently about L&D? And so beyond just upskilling or reskilling, what would you encourage companies to be thinking about in terms of other types of outcomes?
I could think about in the bigger picture of like how it's going to impact the L&D function. So what kind of efficiency gains can we expect relative to if I have 20 people on my team, can I produce 3 times as much this year using generative AI tools than I could beforehand, right? I think those are very measurable, observable, sort of provable kind of things that you can expect as you begin to move down some of these paths, right? Are there other ways we can help people learn that move us beyond, say, our traditional convening of people, or whether that's virtually or in person, right? I think those are all sort of observable, measurable pieces where in the right opportunity you can say, like, this is the outcome that we're actually going for, and you can easily sort of measure that on the back end.
I think there's something to be said, Saurabh, about just to add on to everything Rob said, +1 to all of that. But I think if you think about on the efficiency gains that Rob was talking about, it's not just on the content development front. I think the CLOs in the room would agree that a large percentage of L&D budgets tend to be around content development, whether it's in-house or whether it's outsourced or whether it's third-party, content libraries that you're going to. Now think about the impact of if you use technology like generative AI to create content, then the L&D organization is really focused on the last mile. which is connecting the application of what you've learned in the context of the organization that you operate in, versus having to create the content completely on your own, right? Which tends to be the case 9 out of 10 times. So that's a pretty sizable, ROI that you can get to. Also, if you look at the operational side of the business, a lot of our support teams sometimes in the L&D operations tend to answer questions like, when is the next class around IND? Why am I registration not working? Or why is this completion not done? If you look at how many people actually respond to questions like that, you just calculate the number of hours spent, multiply by whatever you're paying them, and look at what personal assistants, learning assistants can do. You automatically have an ROI related to operational efficiency. But I think Rob hit on something that's so critical, is that ROI is not a backward conversation. You got to start with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? How am I going to measure the outcome at the end of the day? And then figure out whether AI is the right technology to solve that problem or not. Versus saying, let me go apply AI to a problem and I'll figure out what the ROI at the end of it is. So.
Makes perfect sense. So I want to switch gears a lot. We've been thinking a lot from the organizational lens. And what I want to do is spend a little bit of time thinking from the worker's lens. And so as I started, one of the big challenges right now is that workers have a lot of anxiety around some of these changes. How are jobs going to change? How are skills going to change? What's the thing that I should be learning if I want to be future-proof? What are the things that will ensure that I have a sustainable career? And so I'd love to, kind of hear a little bit of, from your vantage points, and you all come from slightly different industries, what would your advice be to kind of the next generation of workers? What skills should they be picking up? How do you reduce the anxiety that's on their minds? And maybe, Anshuman, you're actively doing this for new jobs and new skills. How are you thinking about that?
So I think just to preface this, I started my first company back in 1999 on the internet. To me, what's happening in climate feels bigger than that. It's capital P profit and capital P purpose. So every time I am in front of a student audience or a young employees, I tell them, look, it doesn't get any better than this. So that's one part of it. I think back to inside the typical environment. So if you see, there was this Microsoft BCG report that came out about 6 months back, looking at the sustainability skills gap in enterprises. And my lens is obviously very narrowly focused on that. And there, one of the astonishing facts is that 2/3 of all people who are in sustainability roles today have no background in sustainability, were not in sustainability less than 12 months ago. And that's the nature of this thing, which is that we are just booting up this entire skill set from scratch right now. What that means is that on the good side, it means that there isn't actually as much competition for you to be able to get into those kind of roles. And those roles need not mean, you could be still embedded inside your business units and bringing a sustainability lens to what you do. So you could be a procurement person focused on scope 3 emissions. You could be an IT person focused on green IT, and so on and on. But what that also means, and this is a challenge for all of us here, especially L&D leaders, is that the career paths are not entirely clear, right? So what happens after this thing? And that's something that we all have to kind of build, and this means everything from a taxonomy to describe what it means in year 1 and year 5 and year 10 of sustainability roles, and what kind of learning gaps exist that need to be fulfilled, some of them internally, some of them externally.
Interesting. And Anshuman, I forgot to give you the panel warning of don't cite a BCG report on the... I'm just kidding. Praveen, you're doing a bunch of this in some of our conversations around really in and around digital payments. But I'm curious, how are you helping people think about this anxiety and this, totally transformative change that's happening in the industry?
So, of course, everybody knows this. The payments industry is going through a significant transformation. Everything from, digital payments is everywhere. These days, there are more fintechs than you can count. One of the things that we've done as both internally and externally, if you go to visauniversity.com on the web as well, what we've done for our customers is started to think about what are those skills that you need around portfolio management, around processing, around fraud, around cyber, and so on and so forth, and say, how do you upskill along those areas so that you can start to build the right level of skills and deliver the credentials that are needed, that are certified by Visa as a company, so you can go take those credentials and then apply it to jobs that you're looking to apply. I think it's really about, I think Rob and Molly hit on it, it's about reskilling. It's not about saying that my skills are outdated anymore. It's digging deeper to say, what is my skill and how is it transferable to the next role that you need to have? So I think that is the role that L&D honestly needs to play, is help employees understand that their skills are not irrelevant. It's just the context of that skill has now changed. So a mechanic is not because something has gotten automated, they've gone out of context. It's just that now they have robots they need to maintain versus a traditional car that they used to repair, for example. So I think that's sort of the way, the mindset we're looking at, to say, how are these roles shifting? What are those underlying skills that are changing? And then how do you reskill or upskill people in the payments industry?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing the same thing. So at big companies like PepsiCo and probably like Visa, we've over-indexed a bit on choice in learning and under-indexed on the guidance piece. So it's just this kind of wild west of content out there, and people, we don't give the same clarity as like what people should learn when and what difference it makes to them. And I think when you hear people talking about there's no time to learn, what they're saying is it's not a priority because I'm not sure how exactly it's going to matter for me in my career. So what we're doing is, PepsiCo is going through a massive digital transformation, and so we have a very multi-pronged approach to building digital skills across all different roles. And I think one of the most important things we do is we take a role and we look at it, what it is today, and then we forecast for the future what that role is going to look like, and then you create a learning path. And so you're introducing some certainty for folks that I think would take away a lot of the anxiety, because they can see the path from here to there, and then it's in their own hands, to get there.
Interesting. So Molly, let me stick with you as you're thinking about this stuff. One of the things that I find fascinating is, as a L&D leader, you have to work across learners and workers of all kinds of learning styles. And if I just take a lazy heuristic of even just sort of age demographics, you're talking about a generational cohort that spans 40, 50 years and has totally different ways that they learned, and the devices and their kind of comfort with technology and various things. And so I'd be curious, as you start thinking about doing some of these things, how do you do that for the worker who's at the third or fourth transition in their career versus the brand new worker versus the worker that's going to be coming in 5 years that has a totally different style of how they're wanting to absorb information?
I mean, I guess what surprises me is how little difference there is across generations and people's learning preferences. I mean, the biggest complaint we get about our online programs is that people want to be in person, of all ages. And and this is where we have hybrid, and we have like high quality, live synchronous learning online with experts, and then there's some time in person, and they just want to be together. People just want to be together, and they want the grace and the time to step away from their work and really invest in their own development. So I think the convening authority piece of learning is going to continue to be important, and to give that gift of time for people to come and be together. I think audio, what we've learned from podcasts is that we really need a break from the visual, and that it unlocks so many more learning occasions if you can move things into audio and let people do it at the gym and on their commute and things like that. So it's really more like, and this is where I think AI will come in with personalization at scale. So I don't think AI is hype at all. I think this is a problem that L&D's been banging our head against the wall forever about how to deliver personalized learning at scale, and AI can do that as your little co-pilot and your coach, making stuff that's now like a learning program into just a really easy performance support in the flow of work. So I think it's personalizing. Everyone wants personalization. Everyone wants to be together when it makes sense. And, people want options for the different types of, whether it's listening, watching, et cetera, so there's some variety, and that they can accomplish their learning goals at different times of the day.
Makes sense, Molly. And maybe Rob, I want to go to you on same question, but maybe a different dimension of, how do you think about this differently, given a lot of your experiences for different types of workers, frontline workers versus IT workers, people who are in the office versus people who are not in the office. How do you start thinking about upskilling, reskilling, doing a lot more of this personalization, but for people in very different contexts?
Yeah, I would basically say what Molly said. I think in a lot of ways, learners tend to, the challenge with all those dimensions of learners is how do you serve it up to them in a way that it's easy for them to consume, so consistent with the flow of the way that they're doing their work, or consistent in a way that lets them step away from what it is that they can do. So like in a restaurant environment where I've spent many years, it's a production environment. It's hard for people to step away, right? Unless you're a customer and you want to wait, you don't want your server in the back taking a training class while you're waiting for your food. So in any construct. So I think about, well, then how can you deliver it in sort of a small enough segment that it's not disruptive? If it's between peak moments or whatever it might be, can you do that? So you have to think about the environmental construct and where you're expecting people to learn, and then how do you make it most possible for them to do it? I think that's sort of the biggest piece, I would say.
I think the one thing, Saurabh, that just to add on to what Molly was just saying, is one thing we've sort of gotten feedback on is take traditional training and the way online or instructor-led is great, but can you transform that into video and bite-sized learning? I think LinkedIn Learning, as an example, has done that brilliantly in terms of how they've taken bite-sized content, they've organized them into courses, you can consume them individually, you can consume them as a course, etc. And then you layer on AI on top of it that says, now I can tell you, I can recommend content based on your behavior, I can recommend based on who else is watching what, etc. Right? So that makes for a powerful learning environment. And to Molly's point, when it's video, you can watch it on your phone, you can take it, watch it at the gym when you're, or etc. And it makes the training a lot more accessible. But I think I agree that irrespective of all of these modalities, I think people still want to come together in some sort of a cohort and create that connection and not be completely virtual.
So let me just challenge the group a little bit. So one of the early ideas, Molly, that you shared was from the Stanford professor who was talking about maybe we need to work a few years, then study for a few years, things like that. Most of the changes that we're talking about are quite profound, right? And when we, and being able to inject learning makes a ton of sense to me. But the question that I have is, will that be enough? Or do we need to dramatically find ways to do more upskilling for the types of skill changes that we're acting for? And are we doing enough in terms of integrating real learning into the worker's experience to be able to create workers that have the skills that we think are needed for climate, for any of these things that we're talking about?
I'll just say, I think that I have three daughters, and two of them are about to enter the workforce. One of them's already in. And my advice to them is learning is now a requirement of sort of your job, right? So, okay, you're going to be a product manager, great, but learning is the other piece of your job, and you have to be a sponge. You got to go in and learn as much as you can. Figure out what you get excited about. To your robots comment earlier, that person's probably passionate about fixing things. Whether they're fixing a car or fixing a robot, they can still have a career because they're passionate about fixing things. So I keep trying to set expectations with organizations that I'm working with, that cultural piece, that organizational expectation piece, that it really is actually on the individual. You can't expect L&D to necessarily solve and keep pace, frankly, with the upskilling requirements. You need people in the organization to understand that proactively going out and just learning it and or figuring it out is an expectation that's coming as quickly as possible.
Awesome. Well, we have about a minute, so let's do a rapid fire question of put on your crystal ball. You've heard a lot of pitches from a lot of different companies. What's one exciting company or trend that you think you're really betting on in L&D?
I'm not sure if the Khan Academy guys are here, but Khanmigo, the AI bot, is what I like about it is that it's so resonant with their mission to make education free and accessible to everyone on the planet. I think if they do even a half-assed job of it, I think it's a fantastic, the best thing that could have come out in education for a long time.
Love it.
I'll
Rob?
I'll just, back to the sort of connecting people with experts. There's a company that I do some work with called UpDuo that I think is really interesting, early days I would say, but interesting idea around how do you connect knowledge workers in an organization to experts, other experts in the organization, and use the platform literally as a way to engage in a conversation with them.
Praveen, what are you investing in?
I think digital academies or cohort-based academies seems like a very interesting construct. I think we've gone away from MOOCs to these concepts of cohort-based academies, and the fact that they're integrating AI and learning assistance as part of it, I think is extremely powerful. I think it lets the L&D organization sort of focus on that last mile that I was saying and not focus on the content creation per se.
Last word, Molly?
We're working with Arist, which is a text message-based learning company, and they now have a little AI bot that creates courses for you. So it literally took 15 seconds. I said, create something on courageous conversations, and it spit back a pretty darn good course. And we would have massaged it and changed it, but that's the last mile. I mean, I don't have that's 80%, right, of the work. And thank you. Now I can move on to other things.
Amazing. You heard it there. Thank you all for joining this panel.
Thank you.